He's not so little anymore.
Mine's not quite as long as Rick's, hopefully. But I'm not too sure that he didn't copy mine and I didn't copy his, because basically the same comments that Rick just made, I would make the same comments. And again, hold up. Again, appreciate everybody being here, and particularly thank the people who put this together. This is the first year I've attended it, but I've understood the last 3 or 4 years have been great, and every year it grows bigger and better. And today, of course, we're here to honor the Tomcats, and also here to honor Jim Stewart and Jim's family, which we all love and appreciate so much. And so I'm going to spend more time talking about that side of it a little bit, and not to ignore all the stuff that went on and all the guys everywhere else, because as Rick pointed out and Mark pointed out also, there were so many other fathers that participated and helped build us to this point. It wasn't just Jim alone. Jim's name was a common denominator throughout a lot of it, but I always think back a little bit and think, what would it have been like with all the National League down at 17th Street and the American League at 22nd Street? We saw what happened when they all got to high school, what Little League could have been like in those years. You could have taken all the guys from down there, the Lynch boys, and Mike Smith, and Dow Stevens, Burl Kegley from down the National League side, and all the other guys, and tie them in with Rick Dixon and Mike Griffith and Mike Tackett, who's not here, and David Dameron, Johnny Mullins, Tim Huff, and the list just goes on and on, what the city of Ashland could have done. And I think Williamsport, we'd have had permanent reservations probably, I think, for a 5 or 6 year period. And all that goes back to the coaches and that went on. And Rick mentioned most of the coaches along the way, so I won't go back and reiterate that. But I do want to talk a little bit about Jim, if I may. I played for Jim 3 years in Little League, with 2 All-Star teams in Little League. Played for VFW in Babe Ruth League, and he coached, I think, 2 of the years that I played there. Post 76, he coached at least 1 of those years. So I played for Jim 6 or 7 years. So I think I probably knew him about as well as anybody did. Our family and his family were very, very close. And we visit each other's house quite often. My mother here, as everybody has seen, she was vocal in the Little League years, and she did probably teach Mrs. Dixon how to scream and yell a little bit. But Fanny was probably a leader along the way, and Kitty Mullins helped out a little bit, and Mike Tackett's mother was cheering along too. So as every time we thought an umpire may have made a mistake, they were sure he made a mistake. So they took care of that for us. But to talk about Jim just a little bit, he had a great passion for the game. He knew how to pick talent out. I want you to remember that comment for just a minute towards the end, that he knew how to pick talent. A lot of people said, how come he always had good players? Well, he doesn't necessarily have good players. He developed good players along the way. And as you heard Rick mention, we would practice down here at the park at 8 o'clock every Saturday morning. We'd practice till about noon. And then after school every day at 3 o'clock or 3:30, we'd practice till nearly it got dark, seemed like. We did that every single day. And once the season started, you played 1 day a week, and you played on Saturday. Well, the other 4 weekdays, we practiced those 4 days. Most other teams didn't, but we always did. And Jim got out there and worked us just as hard. As Rick said, he stood out there and played third base, or he played shortstop, or he played first, or he played center field, or he caught, he pitched. And when he pitched to us, it wasn't just batting practice, go up there and lob it up there. You better be ready, because it's coming. And we all learned how to hit that way. We won a lot of our games before the game even started. We took infield practice. He hit the ball as hard as he could at you. And I probably still got bruises on my wrist where the ball hit me numerous times. My chest is probably still bruised from over the years, as everybody else probably is. But when we'd leave the field, other teams would look at us and say, wow, does he always hit it that hard? And I'd say, well, except for when he's mad at us and he really hits it thin. So we learned to catch it, and he worked us and worked us and worked us. And we had a great spirit on the team. Jim also had a great spirit and a great heart. And if anybody ever needed anything, if anybody was down the luck a little bit and needed a little bit of help, Jim was there to help. And he wasn't a wealthy man, but Jim took care of people. He knew either where to get the resources to help, or he reached in his pocket himself to take care of folks. And everybody loved Jim Stewart that played with him. Everybody didn't play for him, didn't necessarily like Jim Stewart. Jim was a winner. And to be a winner, you got to work hard. And he definitely worked hard, and he worked us hard. And to understand his makeup and why he did that and where his passion came from. Jim was in the military, and I go back to his military years, back in 1944. It wasn't soon after the invasion in Normandy, where the U.S. was obviously looked like winning the war and moving forward, and the end of the war would be near. But then the Battle of the Bulge came along, and Jim was right in the middle of the Battle of the Bulge. And a lot of people probably don't know about this about Jim. And he got into hand-to-hand combat. his entire platoon of men were overrun by the German army. Jim's the only one that survived. The entire platoon was wiped out. Jim lay for 3 days under the bodies of his platoon members until other American troops came along 3 days later and found him. And so we thought practice was hard. It was nothing. I mean, man, it was nothing to him. And so we complained. We didn't complain long because he tells us to shut up and play. So we would do it that way. But he was quite a man. He didn't necessarily treat everybody the same, but he treated everybody fair. And I think what we mainly learned from him was that to treat people fair, be gentlemen. Rick said, I never heard the man ever utter a cuss word in my entire life. I played for a number of coaches over the years, and he may have been one of the very few, but he got his point across. He didn't have to. He got his point across to us. Some of Jim's favorite sayings, which we all heard many, many times. And if you hit an infield to pop up, it was a can of corn. We heard that several times. And I heard that a lot of times because I hit a lot of infield pop-ups. He'd also say, 2 hands while learning. You talked about Charlie Jackson trying to make a basket catch. His motto was 2 hands while learning. When you're playing on TV for the Cincinnati Reds, you can start using 1 hand. And that's what he would tell us all the time. And there wasn't too many of us that played on TV for the Cincinnati Reds, so we all used 2 hands. He'd also always say, you play the ball, don't let the ball play you. Charge it, go get it, make things happen. And we did that. Donnie Delaney and I were talking a few minutes ago, and he always talked about, and Donnie's probably the only person it's ever happened to who actually stood there and took a 3rd strike. The rest of us were scared to, but we all had that experience. But Jim would always look at you, no matter what you did. If you're a little bit slow to react, his favorite saying was, he who hesitates is lost. And I heard that my entire first year, I think. The other thing he dwelled on, and Rick mentioned the umpires that we had over the years, and he would tell us, umpires are not perfect, even though Clyde Chin may have thought he was. I'm not too sure, but we all thought he was. But he would tell us umpires are not perfect, and we're never, ever to argue with an umpire. He said, you accept their decision. If anybody's going to argue with them, I'll argue with them. And he said, you're not perfect. You make errors and mistakes, and they're going to make a mistake. And we all believe that until about the 3rd game, and I was 10 years old, and we're playing the White Sox. Steve Gerrard playing, I think, center field that day. And it must have been a pass ball, and I went to second. The ball got overthrown to second, so I'm going to run to 3rd. The next thing I know, boom, the ball's over there, and Tim Jackson's umpiring, and he calls me out. And I got up and said something to Tim Jackson. And the time I walked in the dugout, Jim said, so-and-so, you take those plays, you're out of the game. And I thought, wow. And then the next thing I hear is a booming voice. Everybody down here at this end, and probably down 17th Street, probably heard, Tim, that was a great call. He was out by a mile. I never argued with an umpire again, but I did take his advice. He said if anybody's going to argue with him, it'd be him, the manager. So when my son was 8 years old, I was the manager of the team, so I went out and argued with an umpire one day, and I got thrown out of the game. So I didn't learn too well, but that was the experience of what went on with arguing with the umpires anyway. I won't cover. Rick covered a lot about the Little League team in the World Series, or close to the World Series experience, other than to say Jim took care of us as a team. And he always believed that we did things as a team. And when we went to Lexington to play in the state tournament, we decided to go swimming one afternoon. And we all jump in the pool, and we look outside the fence. And Charlie Jackson, who's here, and Mike Johnson, I don't think Mike was here, standing outside the fence. And this was back when integration was just started, and they weren't allowed to swim with us. None of us understood that. So Jim rounds us up, and we jump out of the pool and go play miniature golf. We all rush inside. We get a miniature golf club and a ball and look outside, and there stands Mike and Charlie. None of us had any idea what was going on. He rounds us up and takes us back to the dorms. The dormitory we stayed in, Rick, was Donovan Hall. I do remember that. And it's funny, you and I come up with all these little details that are worthless, but, we had said something in our mind anyway. I think we rented a movie that night. I got a movie some way, and we watched it as a team that day. And then when we're going to Norfolk, Virginia, and we get on a bus, we left at midnight. And I might add, all the other 3 teams that went there from Biloxi, Mississippi, and Houston, Texas, and Sarasota, Florida, all flew into Norfolk, Virginia. And we left Central Park at midnight to get a bus to drive to Norfolk, Virginia. We stopped somewhere, I think it was actually Ashland, Virginia, where we stopped to have breakfast. And we all piled off the bus and go into a restaurant. few minutes later, we all pile back on the bus. We hadn't eaten yet. And we go to a little few miles down the road, and Jim gets off the bus this time. A few minutes later, he gets back on. We a little bit further, and he gets back on. And then we stop for a while. And Jim gets back on the bus with a bunch of boxes, hands them out, and we stop at a little roadside park to eat together. And Jim believed that we worked as a team, and that's exactly what it was. We were a team. We were a unit, and we stayed that way. And that was the success that we experienced the rest of the time. And I'll never forget that. But also remember when we got to Norfolk, Virginia, we stayed at the Naval Base. And we're standing in line at the mess hall, and we're having our first meal through there. And Charlie, I don't remember if it was you or Mike Johnson. I was standing right behind you, and we're going through the line, and one of them asked, "Can I eat here?" And this colorful language sailor standing behind the line said, "Blankety, blankety, blankety, blank. I don't care if you're white, black, green, yellow, or blue. You're going to eat what I give you." And that's how it was from there on out. But the team was pulled together. Jim took care of folks. He believed to take care of his boys, and we were all his boys. And we all loved Jim and Fanny for that. Rick touched about the game that we lost in Norfolk, and coming back, it was a sad trip back. I mean, and again, I had in my notes in here that Jim would probably been a pretty good gambler because he didn't lose a coin flip all year long till that one, and that's exactly right. But we're riding back home on that long bus ride back, and as we arrived close to the Kentucky border, you start seeing lines and lines of cars lining up. It's absolutely incredible. You know, we're 11, 12-year-old kids, and here's half the town of Ashland out to greet us in a fire truck out there. We didn't know what to do, and we're absolutely stunned. It was absolutely remarkable. And I don't know, the newspaper obviously trained Mark very well because Mark has followed a tradition of following what's going on. We had more coverage out of the newspaper during all those ball games you can imagine. WCMI Radio, Dickie Martin and them, they kept up with us all the way through. And the city of Ashland supported us, all the businesses in town and all the people in town who helped us through. And it was absolutely incredible. You just couldn't ask for anything more. But there was one thing that was more and more dear to Jim's heart. And when I said Jim had an eye for talent, sitting right over here was this young lady. I still refer to Fanny as a young lady. The story goes, and the legend has it, and I'm going to disclose the story today, how all this came about. It's been a well-guarded family secret for years, so it'll come out today. Jim was home from the military at that point, walks into Murphy's 5 and dime store. And I thought he was with a cousin or with a friend, whoever it was.
His brother.
Brother? All right, so they walked into the store, and working behind the candy counter is Fanny. And he walks in and said, "Wow, what a babe." And Sherry said she was 9 years old before she knew Fanny had a name other than Babe. And if you'll recall, he always called her Babe, is what he always referred to her as. And we didn't have any idea why, but that's exactly what it was. And his true love was Fanny, his 2 daughters, Bev and Sherry, and then Jamie came along. He longed for a son, but he had 2 wonderful daughters before that came along, and he lived his life for his family. And we appreciate that so much. We really did. And one thing, and I do have 2 prized possessions here, and I heard y'all talking a while ago, somebody said those balls you're signing are going to be valuable one day. Well, here's the 1963 Little League Baseball ball signed by all the players back in 1963, 50 years ago. I've had this prized possession for years, and I'll keep this prized possession, I hope, for years. We'll see. And here's one just a little bit younger. Here's one only 49 years old from 1964, signed by all players off that team in 1964. I hope these are more valuable than the ones we just signed a few minutes ago. I think they very well might be. They very well might be. And here's my Little League hat, my All-Star hat, that I wore for that. And I think it's only appropriate that we tip this hat to the Stewart family, who we appreciate so much what you all did, what you meant for us.